Hey folks, how's it going? So, it's Friday, finally done with work, looking forward to a weekend of fishing, as I haven't been out in a while. But what I'm going to share with you today is the seminar, the Snakehead Seminar that I gave over at Island Tackle Outfitters. And man, I've been driving past that place, I don't know for how long at this point, never knew about it, and man, is that a hidden gem over there. They have some excellent gear. So thanks much to Dave and to Ange for inviting me out and hosting the event. You know, it was a great time. Put out a lot of good information, had a lot of good back and forth with everybody there, and just a lot of good conversations on the species. Explored a lot of different kinds of perspectives and, you know, some proposed solutions. It was interesting, very interesting conversation, great time. So, I'm going to break this up into two pieces, all right, because it's over an hour, you know, and that's kind of a long video to sit through. So I'm going to break it in half. And with that said, let's get to it.
All right, we're going to get started. First off, I want to thank everybody for coming out. I know the whole snakehead thing here is getting big and everyone's starting to pick an interest in it. Tonight we got Steve Kambouris, local angler and snakehead aficionado. Does it all the time, got pretty damn good at it. He's also on YouTube under Kambotrout is the name, so he's got a bunch of snakehead YouTube videos. So if you guys want to go back and kind of look a little bit closer at some of the things he does or pick up on some more tips, that's definitely a good way to do it. So I'm going to pass the reins over and let Steve kind of talk about his craft.
All right, thanks Dave, thanks Ange, thanks for the invite, and thanks for coming out. Snakehead, or like he said, we'll get into the details later and all the different aspects of the fish that make it so kind of appealing to fishermen. So with that said, we'll get started. What I'm going to do first with the presentation right here is just give you a real brief intro as to who I am. I mean, I'm a Maryland native, born and raised, but I joined the U.S. Army at 18 and I basically bounced around the globe for about 12 years and eventually ended up back here home in Maryland. So happy to be here and never thought I would ever come across a species like this when I got back to Maryland. So I've been addicted ever since I started chasing them, probably about August of last year or so. Yeah, so I haven't been on them long, but once I found a fish like this, I pretty much devoted most of my time and energy to learning how to catch them and learning about them. So start with a real brief introduction to the species here. Now, their native range is in Asia. And in terms of the first introduction, I think what came first was Crofton, followed very closely by the Potomac. And since then, the species has a very high propensity to colonize. They have what's been termed so far, a lot of the science is still pretty new on the species, but kind of a spring push. And that spring push, coupled with their ability to travel, at least into a limited respect, over land, between pools, up through small streams, their range has really expanded over time. Now, the maximum size for snakehead, it almost seems like it keeps going up, honestly, which from what I've heard from some biologists is that when you have a novel species, a new species, and a new ecosystem, they can actually exceed the lengths they grew to in their actual home ecosystem. And that seems to might be the case with northern snakehead. So up to the high 30s in inches in terms of length is probably about the maximum length for them. But what you're going to get once they get to that size is they just get wider and wider and thicker. So, I mean, you can catch like a 33-inch snakehead that weighs probably 11, 12 pounds, or you can catch a 34-inch snakehead that weighs about 16 or 17 pounds. They have kind of sexual dimorphism between the males and females, and when those males get to a certain size, that just the width just starts to expand. You'll see them start turning a darker color, almost like a jet black. Not quite that dark, but not far off either. It's really fascinating. Now, their diet, they're opportunistic feeders. They spend most of their time in very shallow water, so whatever they can come across in shallow water, if they can fit it in their mouth, they'll probably eat it. Now, most of the studies they've done, the ones that have been published so far in the Potomac show the main forage base to be, generally speaking, killifish, at least by number, and by weight, sunfish. Also eats crayfish. They do find the occasional other species like yellow perch, white perch, crappie, bass, but nowhere near to the degree that they prey upon like the smaller bait fish like killifish, crayfish, sunfish. And the appearance, you kind of see it right here. This is what you see a lot of them have. It seems to be as they're younger, they have a much more stark pattern. Some of the smallest ones you'll catch will often be some of the most beautiful ones you catch. And there seems to be some kind of variability between what environment they're in and what kind of patterning they have. I've seen some that are caught in clear water that just seem to be far and away more, I don't know, I call them beautiful. That's how I feel about it at this point. But I did want to point out this one thing over here on the right. Like Maryland, Virginia area, I think they actually extend up a little farther north as well. We have a native species called the bowfin. And when the snakehead really started to pick up, a lot of people, and to a degree I think it still happens now, people will accidentally kill bowfin thinking it's snakehead. And one of the easiest ways you can tell between a snakehead and a bowfin, short anal fin and extended anal fin. There's some other differences, but when you're actually holding the fish, it's a little bit more difficult. So looking at the anal fin right there is a great way to determine between the two species. Now, I said their range has expanded quickly, and I'm not sure how well you all can see this, but just to list off some of the waters that they've essentially established themselves in now. We have the Potomac River, Blackwater Wildlife Refuge, and a lot of the rivers around Blackwater. The Patuxent River, Wacomico River, and they're starting to be caught fairly regularly up in the Gunpowder, the Bush, and the Northern Bay. So, like I said before, and now, there's two aspects to this. One is that snakehead are good colonizers, and they do have a high tolerance for salt water. You know, I've heard some stories where they've been found really close to the actual mouth of the bay. But the other side of this is that fishermen are breaking the law, and they are transporting these fish to other waters. So, as I go through this, I guess, presentation here, I want to make one point clear. I do love the species, but there have not been enough studies done on all the different ecosystems for me, or I think anyone else really, to responsibly recommend intentionally spreading the species. All right, I want to make that point clear. But beyond what I recommend, it's against the law. So if you get in trouble, or if you get caught with it, you're going to be in some kind of trouble for it. All right? Now, here is probably the most contentious question around snakehead. Are they invasive? And answering this question all comes down to how you define the term. Northern snakehead have been listed as invasive at the federal level. By the federal definition, for a species to be listed as invasive, non-native or alien to the ecosystem, and whose introduction causes or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm. Okay? So that is likely. When you look at a snakehead, they're able to breathe air. Both parents guard their young. They're very strong fish. They have teeth. They grow large. They have all these different aspects that when you put them together, it's a very reasonable assumption that when you put them in a new ecosystem, that they're going to outcompete whatever's there. Now, I say it's a very logical assumption. Thus far, we've been very lucky. The studies that have been done thus far, like within the Potomac River system especially, there are other ongoing studies in Blackwater and elsewhere where those results may not hold up, but thus far, little to no invasive impact. And I say little to no invasive impact, I mean no ecological, environmental, or economic harm thus far demonstrated. Now that could change. Like I said, the science is still fairly young. We've been stuck, I say we. I work at the American Fishery Society. I'm on the staff. I get to talk to a lot of fishery scientists. I want to get clear, I'm not a fishery scientist. All right? I'm at the master's program over at Hopkins for something different. I love reading any kind of science I get my hands on with the species, which is what brought me here. So, once again to summarize, they are labeled an invasive species at the federal level. A lot of people can still consider them invasive, and arguably it's a very prudent position. You don't want to take a species that we haven't tested in all these different ecosystems and start to assume they're not going to hurt anything. That's kind of a dangerous assumption to make. But the good news is, thus far, no invasive impact demonstrated in the published science that's out there. So, when the snakehead craze started, we had all kinds of stories out there. They were crawling over land to attack pets, eat cats, dogs, children. attacking people when they're in the water. I think we had some B-movie, horror movies out there about snakehead. The fact that snake is in their name and the fact that they have teeth has done this fish no favors in terms of the PR campaign. All right, at that and media taking a lot of kind of license to the point of sensationalism has led a lot of people to think these fish are especially more dangerous to people than they actually are. Now, with that being said, I'll get into how to handle snakeheads a little bit later in the video. You can see the teeth here. Keep your fingers and your hands away from the business end of this fish. Always make sure you have a good pair of pliers, hemostats, lip grippers. You don't want to be trying to handle this fish with your hands. They're too slippery, and if your fingers do somehow get close to their mouth, they could chew you up pretty badly. All it takes is one shake of their head. And if you've seen it in my videos, you've probably seen it before, but I have some video here as well of what I call the snakehead freakout. They have such a slick mucus coating, and it seems like they actually excrete more of it when they're actually being handled because they're stressed. If you try to hold a snakehead in your hands, if they have any kind of energy left, there's a good chance you're going to lose control of that fish pretty quickly. So, yes, no attacks on humans. We can put that to the side. I've mentioned before, studies are ongoing. Just the fact that they haven't demonstrated invasive impact in the Potomac, for example, doesn't mean they won't be invasive somewhere else. When you change the ecosystem, you change the other organisms they're going to be interacting with. You change all those variables, then the output can change. And let's see, yes, handle with caution. And again, it is illegal to introduce these fish into any new waters. I'll get into the law a little bit later, but do not take it upon yourself to introduce these fish anywhere else. So getting into a little bit of the Maryland law here.
Can I ask you a question? Can
Absolutely.
I stop for questions?
Yes.
You mentioned bowfin. Are they in the same regions and same areas as the?
Not in all of them, but some of them, yes.
And do they have the same similar mouth structure, teeth, and all?
They do have teeth. I mean, there's a difference when you look at the two fish. I used to catch them down in Georgia fairly often when I was stationed down in Georgia. They do have very similar mouth structures. Similar body structures. Aside from the pattern and that anal fin, it's easy to mistake the two if you're not familiar with them. But yes, bowfin as well, you don't want to put your finger in the mouth. So,
A question.
Sure.
Are they native species?
bowfin?
Yep.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Now, for Maryland law, it is, if you possess a fish, and what they mean by possession, and I've consulted with biologists about this, hopefully I get it right, but we have some biologists in the audience. If I get it wrong, you let me know. When it comes to defining possession, that means it's in your cooler, it's on a stringer, it's anything but you removing the hook and letting it go. That's possession. Right. If it's in your possession, it must be dead. Now, right now, within the current Maryland regs, they specify a few different ways that you're allowed to kill these fish. But there is a proposal right now that you can look up on the DNR website where they're going to remove the various ways to kill them and just say they must be dead. And that way that you can dispatch them however you choose to dispatch them. It just makes it kind of easier in that way. Transporting them, again, must be dead. If you're on the road with snakehead, that fish has got to be dead. If it's not and you are caught, you will be prosecuted. Catch and release. By Maryland law, you are allowed to release a snakehead back into the exact waters that you caught it. Don't put it in the cooler, don't put it on a stringer, don't have it on your person unless it's dead. If you do that, you're in violation of the law. But you can release it back into the waters in which you caught it. And I already covered this update right here, so we'll go to the next slide. And I did have a slide at the end for questions, but I guess I can start stopping with each slide, just make it easy on everybody. Any questions on this slide? Ange?
You said do not put them on the stringer. Can you keep them on the stringer while you're fishing?
So DNR has some discretion in this area, but by the letter of the law, if you are in possession of it and the stringer counts as possession, it should be dead.
Even if you're in the water, in your kayak?
From talking to the, and I see Jim nodding his head over here.
Yeah.
So,
So I work with the regulations folks, and they said that if you intend to keep it, it should be killed immediately.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Will you go into the most efficient ways to kill them?
yes.
Like, what's the best way to?
The best way So it's going to depend on your position. Actually, I have one gentleman in attendance here who has a particular product that's very good at dispatching these fish. So you can decapitate them. That's one way. Blows to the head, if they're severe enough, will do the job. That's how I used to do it when I was keeping the fish. I haven't kept that many recently. Like a lead pipe or just anything that you can use to bludgeon ice. If I forgot my little pipe, then I would punch them. You know, it's doable, but there's easier ways to do it than punching them. I would say decapitating them, gutting them completely, or completely ripping out the gills. But I mean, you really have to do a number on their gills because these fish are nothing if not survivors. Like you can do a lot of damage to these fish and they will still be good to go.
You're saying throw a hammer in your tackle box.
A claw hammer was my other tool of choice.
So I'm in a kayak and I find it hard to use Kaz's method with a machete basically. I took a small Phillips head screwdriver and I made it so it's only about 2 inches long. And you put that on the back of the head and hit it with the back of your hand. Enough that it can't go through the head into your leg. It works pretty good. But the spot you got to hit is pretty small. It's like smaller than a dime.
Yep.
So on the back of the head it works pretty good. But I just keep it in the net the whole time though. If it shakes while I'm doing it, it doesn't get away.
How about if you don't want to hit him in the head, just jerk the gills out of him and needle that?
And that's I think that's another approved way. Yes, Jim?
Removing the gill arches.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
But I mean, make sure you completely remove them. Like a lot of the fishes, like striped bass, for example, you can slip a knife in their gills, slice the gills to bleed them out, and they'll be done a little while later. Not the case with snakehead. Like they are hardy survivors. You really got to make sure you finish the job. So that's probably one of the things that y'all really want to know is where to find them. So I already showed you some of the rivers that they're in. And you can go on the DNR website, a few of the resources out there, and they actually map out and record all the reported catches they've had of snakehead. So you know, we live in the information age. Get on the internet, do the searches. Those repositories of information for all the known catches of snakehead, those are out there. All right. And I mean, there's a lot of Facebook forums you can join, snakeheadlife.com. There's a bunch of other ones out there where guys are more than willing to either take you out and go fishing or tell you where they are to go get them. But with that being said, the types of areas you're going to find them, this is going to vary seasonally. When you start out in the beginning of the year, like it was once thought that snakehead hibernate through the winter. That either isn't the case or only happens in extreme cold. Because I was catching them as early as February this year. Now, when you're in the early part of the season, there's not a lot of vegetation around. But what you can find are shallow mud flats. If you can find shallow mud flats, because of how dark that bottom is and how shallow the water is, when it finally does start to warm up for 3 or 4 days in a row, I won't say they're active. You're not going to catch them on lures. But if you can find some nice big bait fish, put about 6 to 18 inches under a float, you can catch them as early as probably around February time frame. That's the earliest that I've caught them. And like I said, I've only been out about a year and a half. I've been hitting it hard for a year and a half, but only about a year and a half, so you might even be able to catch them even earlier than that. So that's early season. Early season, you're looking for those shallow mud flats. A little bit, I'm sorry, was there a question? Thought I heard something. All right, sorry. So after the early season, you get into like the kind of March, April time frame. If it's warm enough, the vegetation is just starting to come up. They might start keying on that vegetation, but again, your shallow mud flats are going to be key. And your shoreline timber that you're looking at right here, I've caught a lot of them in shoreline timber in the kind of March to April time frame. But once these pads start coming up, that's money. That is where I go to do damage. And it's because once you hit that probably around late March, you can start throwing inline spinners and do pretty well. And after that, then you can start throwing your chatterbaits, and probably about the end of April, you can get on your topwater.
Well, folks, that's the first half, like I said. I will leave the follow-on video right up here, okay? And with that being said, you can go ahead and watch that half. Any questions or comments on this one, let me know. Please like, share, and subscribe for more content, and you'll have a good one.